Hey everybody, this is Javi, and you are watching the Inner Child Collective, where you and your inner child heal for the better. Welcome and hello. For those who are new to the page or don't know me or anything like that, um, I am a psychic, intuitive medium, and author who specializes in inner child therapy. And the work that I do in regards to the inner child, I talk about how generational and historical trauma affect us as children, how we adopt certain archetypes as a result of our abuse and what we have been through as children, and how our subconscious mind plays a huge part in keeping those stories alive and how we can dismantle those stories. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today. Hey, to the person who hopped on, I wanted to talk a little bit today about intersectionality. And this is actually for before I even get to that, like this is going to be the very first episode of a segment called Let's Discuss, and it's going to be based on the question of the week, um, the post that I put on the page. So be ready for that. And this week I talked about intersectionality, um, and us going through discrimination as a result as children, as a result of how our intersections were used against us and weaponized against us, that and that actually plays into our trauma and what we are going through now. And so the first question I asked, the question of the week was, of all of your intersections, which of your intersections were used against you the most when you were a child? So I know for me, I asked that question because I'm starting to realize this and really discovered that a lot of what we went through and and how we feel about ourselves has everything to do with how our intersections were weaponized against us. And the reason why intersectionality even exists is because of white supremacy and white supremacist ideologies around certain um, around who we are as people and how we are to be accepted as people. And everyone pretty much can, you know, um, be a victim to this, right? So for those who don't know, intersectionality is when everything we go through various types of discrimination based on who we are and what attributes and traits we have. So an example of intersectionality is our race, our ethnicity, our sexual orientation, disability, seen and unseen, our body, how our bodies look like, or physical appearance. Um, those are like a few examples. Our political and social affiliate or not affiliations, but not social, but our spiritual affiliations, our religious affiliations, our spiritual and religious beliefs, our social economic status. Those are even our like our sex. Those are examples of intersections, right? And everyone has them. Every human being has an intersection, and so have many intersections. For instance, I'm a black, agender, trans masculine individual with mental health issues, which is another intersection, who believes in psychic ability. And so those are a few of my intersections. And intersections have they do have the power to change. They will change over time depending on what you are going through and what changes you have made. So they're not set in stone, a lot of them. And so when we were children, we have certain, intersections that we cannot change. We all have those intersections that we cannot change. And as children, we learn, what's acceptable and not acceptable based on how we see others treat certain people and how and what the adults in our life deem acceptable and unacceptable. In other words, a lot of what we learn about ourselves, we learn from people outside of us. Because between the ages of 2 and 7, we're like sponges. Children are like sponges. We end up like absorbing everything we've learned. And when we absorb everything we learn, we take that as truth. A lot of it we take as truth because we simply don't know better, and we are counting on the adults. We're very much intellectually and emotionally dependent upon the adults around us, the world around us, caretakers around us, the greater society around us. And so, in abusive households, um, as children, we have the tendency to believe the negative things that are told to us. We have the tendency to believe that something is wrong with us because certain intersections, our attributes, and who we are at the core is not accepted. So, say for instance, you're an overweight child, you're an overweight black child, right? Um, you could be talked about just simply because, or not accepted because of your weight, or because of the way your body looks. Um, and especially if you either grew up as a black girl, or you're very much a black girl. What ends up happening is that because the body of women, or people who present as female, or cis female rather, who are overweight or considered overweight, have the tendency to be made fun of. It's like, definitely by family members. So what ends up happening is that we grow up thinking, we automatically uh, believe in this story that somehow our bodies are unacceptable. When we start to believe that, we start to feel as if there's something wrong with us, that we're unacceptable, we're lovable, we're ugly, we are like any bigger child, right? We have the tendency to think that something is wrong with us. We feel it in the core, and then we start to act as if we start to want to change ourselves. We do everything we can to be accepted. We do everything to be acceptable. And so what ends up happening is that we end up growing up as adults, having those um, thoughts about ourselves, those negative thoughts about ourselves. Hey, to the person who popped on, let yourself be known so I can say hey. So that's what happens when we um, when it comes to intersections and intersectionality, and how those are weaponized against us, not just by our families, but by those, by peers, by the religious community, by the greater society, um, like in the various systems that we're a part of. So the child, hey, Karis. So we end up growing up thinking that we are the problem. We end up growing up thinking that somehow something is wrong with us, innately wrong with us. And no matter what we do, um, we can't shake that, or we won't be able to shake that. This is one of the reasons why a lot of kids grow up being people pleasers, or like hating themselves, or just feeling as if there's something that about them that's so unacceptable that no one is going to be around them. So they end up changing themselves, and developing a lot of coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms in order to change, or to be the person, or the type of person that is deemed acceptable. This is one of the reasons why there are eating disorders in families, people pleasing, why the child is silent, because being quiet, as a gay child, like a gay black child with maybe a disability, they feel like they're not going to be heard anyway, so they start to stay silent. It's things like that we go through as children. We end up developing a lot of defense mechanisms because our intersections, as we are is just not acceptable. So I am asking you to like really, when you're doing inner child work, any sort of inner child work, to ask yourself which intersection caused you the most pain in regards to people weaponizing it against you. For me, it was my physical appearance. I was always called ugly. I was called ugly. I was called ugly throughout the years. Because I am a black child with a black body, with a brown body, I also have white kids talk about how ugly I am. No matter what I did or what I said to defend myself, or to look right, or to be acceptable, it just wasn't. It wasn't enough for me to not be bullied, or to not have people talk about me in some way, shape, or form because the first thing they saw was my face, and therefore I was ugly to a lot of these folks. I carried that throughout my childhood because, in addition to being called ugly, I was also sexually abused. And so what ended up happening to me is that like I became extremely promiscuous, chasing that relationship. To like one of the reasons I chased that relationship to prove to people that I was not that I was attractive, I was sexually attractive and physically attractive, and there was nothing wrong with me. It's because at one intersection, my physical appearance was used against me throughout my entire life, throughout my childhood and teenage years. When I started doing a lot of the inner child work that I do now, I started to realize that there is a connection between how I felt about myself and how my intersections were used against me. And not only that, I began to realize that a lot of what was said to me anyway was very much connected to a Eurocentric standard of beauty that stems from white supremacy. Because white supremacy is about perfection. It's about perfection. And if you're not perfect, then you are deemed as the other. So when our intersections are used against us in some way, shape, or form, it comes from this mentality, this Eurocentric, that's very Eurocentric in general. It comes from this mentality of being imperfect. Let me turn this light. So we end up like, and so let's go back a little bit. When we use our intersections against us, like when we believe in these stories that somehow our intersections are an issue or a problem, that our intersections of who we are and what the attributes we possess are an issue and a problem, what ends up happening is that we end up discriminating against ourselves. We end up believing that we don't belong somewhere. We end up hating ourselves as a result of of the messages we have received, and we start discriminating against ourselves. We start hexing ourselves with our words. We purposely keep ourselves from certain opportunities and situations because we feel deep down we don't deserve them. We end up internalizing, some of us internalize fat phobia, internalized racism, internalized sexism, internalized transphobia, internalized, ableism. That's self discrimination. When we internalize those things, that's self discrimination. So when we go through this work, we have to like dismantle psychologically. We are to dismantle a lot of what we've learned about our intersections in order to see the beauty within your intersections, or to not see them as absolute, like they are flawed in some way, shape, or form. We are to dismantle psychologically those stories. We are to psychologically dismantle those lies about ourselves, about our attributes, regardless of what they are. Because it's very Eurocentric in nature, as far as how our intersections are seen as a flaw or something that is to change. And we learn that as children. We definitely learn that as kids. I really do believe that in order for us to heal in general, we are to really recognize how white supremacy has psychologically terrorized us to the point where for generations and generations, a lot of what we've been taught about ourselves was meant to be toxic. It was meant to be dehumanizing. It was meant to be humiliating. It was meant to disempower us. It was meant to disempower the human race. It was very much everything that we have learned in regards to our intersections being flaws. It was passed down from one generation to the next. Our parents, when if they were to call us ugly, or they were to call us fat, or they were to call us or say that, because you are gay or trans, or you come out in the of the closet in some way, shape, or form, or you have been told that, or you're from another part of the world and you're being told that in order for you to be accepted, you are to get rid of your accent or to um, distance yourself from your culture in some way, shape, or form. It's because from generation to generation, we have been taught to feel disempowered and to disempower ourselves and to disempower each other. And then, like, generations of people who were children, they pass that on to their kids, you know, so on and so forth. So you have a whole generation of people who don't love themselves because they've internalized a lot of those messages. They're very, very white supremacists in nature. So in order for us to effectively do a lot of the work in regards to, like, the healing work, we are to really recognize and understand how white supremacy works, and we also understand how they affected us as children. So I ask you, what intersection out of all your intersections were used against you the most? Because that's where you and your inner child are to heal. That's where you and your inner child are to work and start. Who called you those things? Who said you were fat? Who said you were ugly? Where did it start? When did it start? And what happened as a result of that intersection being used against you? What happened to you as a result? What happened? What defense and coping mechanisms did you adopt and internalize as a result of that intersection being used against you? When did it start? And what stories have you heard about that certain intersection that you have internalized? And how do you weaponize it against yourself? How do you weaponize those stories against yourself that you heard about your intersections? What do you say to yourself? How do you weaponize it against yourself? Did it turn into internalized fat phobia? Did it turn into, like, internalized racism? Did it become or develop into internalized ableism? Are you now ashamed of yourself because you need food stamps? Are you now using your spirituality not to become a better person or to solidify your connection with the divine, your own divinity and spirit, but because you have been told time and time again that God does not accept you unless you are a certain way? How did you weaponize your intersection against yourself? That particular intersection that caused you the most pain and caused you to be the most humiliated or feel humiliated. How do you use it against yourself? Those are the questions you are to ask yourself. And then tell your inner child, tap into that inner child energy. Have that conversation with your inner child and tell them that everything that's been said about them. There's nothing wrong with your intersections. There's nothing wrong with your body. There's nothing wrong with your um. There's nothing wrong with with being impoverished. That's not that doesn't make you who you are. That doesn't define you. Tell them that they are loved and cherished by you. That everything you heard about the intersection was a complete lie. That there's nothing wrong with that intersection. There's nothing wrong with any part of you. During your meditation, speak to your inner child because they are a separate entity. Your inner child is a separate entity. They're your kid now. They're in your subconscious. They're in your unconscious. And they're waiting for you to pay attention to them. They're waiting on you to have a connection with them. So please tell your inner child, tap into that energy, tap into their spirit. And it's not just that one part of yourself, that one inner child that is affected. All of your inner selves are affected. All of them are. They have their own interests, their own way of looking at the world, their own way of looking at themselves, their own way of doing things and thinking and coping with what they had to deal with at that time. At that particular time where it happened. So please, 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 in order for you to completely understand why you feel a certain way about yourself, tap into your inner child and tell them that there's nothing wrong with them and they're lovable as they are, and that through your healing you would help them realize their own power. You would help them realize their own power. You would help them realize that they are capable of living a life where their intersections are not an issue and they are not to take personally what other people have to say about them. Because what people are to say to them, for one, it has nothing to do with them. And quite frankly, you're no one else's business. People dig into dug at your intersections because they did not feel their own power and they had issues with their own intersections. They had power with their own self. And they believed in those white supremacist ideologies around your intersections and theirs. Say, for instance, a thin person or a thin child may make fun of a child with a fat body because they believed in that white supremacist ideologies around thinness, and received the message over and over again from our society and people around them that somehow being thin is better, being thin is acceptable, being thin is somehow superior because it represents perfection. What ends up happening is that they have internalized a lot of those stories. They've internalized a lot of those stories for themselves. That their thinness makes them perfect, therefore anybody outside of that is imperfect and unacceptable. So if a thin person makes fun of a fat person, or a thin child makes fun of a fat one, it's because they believed, the thin person, the thin child, the skinny child believed in that white supremacist ideology that their body is better. That's why bullying, that's one of the reasons why bullying happens. Because children learn from our society and from the people around them that certain things are perfect and they're accepted because they're seen as perfect. Anything outside of that is to be othered. That's one of the biggest reasons why bullying is such a problem. Because we are using children are using their intersections against one another. They're humiliating one another because of that. You were humiliated because of it. You were seen as imperfect. Therefore, there's something wrong with you. You deserved punishment for that. At this point, when you are doing your own inner child work, you are to see that mentality that you deserve punishment for who you are and the attributes you have. Tell your inner child that is not true, and what people are saying about them has nothing to do with them. It has nothing to do with them. Nothing to do with them. So be aware of the type of, be aware of intersectionality. Please study intersectionality. Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 is the one who invented the term and how it operates. Even though at the time that she was focused on black women, it has since been expanded to different types of people, because we all have intersections. We all been discriminated in some way, shape, or form because of our intersections. This happens to us as children. Your inner child is suffering because of those intersections being weaponized against them. So I'm going to leave you with this. I'm definitely going to leave you with this. Think about how your intersections were weaponized against you, and how you use those intersections and those messages you received about your intersections. Think about how you weaponize them against yourself. Think about how you see yourself when you look in the mirror, and when you think about a certain attribute about yourself. What usually comes to mind? Because nobody wakes up in the fucking morning and say, like, I'm going to hate myself today. I'm going to hate my body today. I'm going to hate my skin color today. I'm going to hate my disabilities today. I'm going to hate my mental illness today. I ain't shit. No one is born with that type of attitude towards themselves and that mentality, against themselves. Nobody wakes up with that. So where did it come from? It definitely didn't come from you. I want y'all to, as we end this segment, I really hope and seriously believe that you are capable of seeing yourself as divine. But in order for you to do that, your inner child is to be a part of the healing process, and your inner child is to know that there is nothing wrong with their intersections. There's nothing wrong with their attributes. There's nothing wrong with them. That everything that they have heard stems from white supremacist ideologies. It has been passed down from one generation to the next. You have been traumatized long enough because of what other people have said about you, because they didn't see their own divinity, and they believed in this myopic view of what perfection is, which really doesn't exist. It was placed in our minds to dehumanize ourselves when we don't turn out to be a certain way. So I leave y'all with that. Thank you so much for paying attention and staying with this video. Thank you so much for just sharing your energy with me. And I hope that this video, in fact, made this video be shared with folks who are meant to hear it, who are meant to hear the message, who are meant to hear this conversation about intersectionality. May it reach y'all, right? May it reach my tribe. May it reach people who are meant to do inner child work, and are ready to do inner child work, and are ready to see themselves, beyond the trauma. See their inner child as happy. See their inner child as beautiful and divine. Because that's how we came into this world. The world fucked us up, y'all. The world fucked us up. And they used our intersections against us in order for us to basically disconnect us from our divinity, from our divine, from our core, from our power. So I'm going to end with that. if you are on, so thank you for watching. And if you are on social media, I'm here on Facebook, Inner Child Collective. I'm here on Facebook. I'm also on Twitter, um, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm also on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel called the Inner Child Collective, and this video is going to go up on there for folks, who want to watch on YouTube. Um, and yeah, that's it. And also, like, I also provide services, inner child archetype readings, general readings, and also like personalized bedtime stories. So if you are interested in any of that, by all means, go to www.innerchildcollective.com and check out the service selection, and you'll be able to find me, through that. Book an appointment. I'm always looking forward to working with other people. I also have a podcast called the Inner Child Collective, which is out every other week, the second and fourth Monday of each month. And so at least that's what I'm working towards anyway. But I'm definitely, but it's definitely there. It's another resource, you can use. I also talk about intersectionality on the podcast as well. So please check it out. Go to iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and check it out and leave a review. It will give me it will definitely give me an opportunity to find out what people are thinking and what people are looking for. But thank you so much again for watching this video, and I will see y'all next time. All right, peace.